we interrupt your regularly scheduled program with this important message.
Greetings, Earthlings. My name is OBT, once beyond time that is, and I am one of the many physical representations of one's inner essence. Essence will be explained later in this video, thanks to the help of my friend Neil. But first, I must explain my presence. I am setting out on a journey in the land of TikTok. There, I will fulfill my mission to help us all connect to our own inner essences by spreading words of original wisdom. I hope to see you there soon. OBT, out.
Hello, good people. Welcome back. My name is Neil, aka Dr. Neil Klein if you want to be formal, but I certainly don't need that whatsoever. Today's video is going to be called Ever Wonder If You Have an Inner Essence? And we'll get back later on why I think this is one of the most important questions to ask yourself ever. And as a parent, as a teacher, and as a human, I think it just sets up how we interact with ourselves and everybody else. But again, we'll get back to that in a little bit. So what I'd like to do is start with a exercise, and it's a quick exercise. I'm going to ask you all, and you can keep your eyes open, but if you want to close them, you're welcome to. I'd like you to think about an occasion in your recent past where you experienced yourself as being most you, most authentic, or most real. So just take a moment with your eyes open or closed. Think about that. In the recent past, think of one instant where you would characterize it as your being most authentic, you, most real, or most you. Please do that. Now I'd like you to have the feeling or the quality of that essence just live inside of you. Make it large and let it swim through all of your cells and all of your being. If you are going to come up with one word to describe the feeling of this or the essence of this or the quality of this moment in your life, what would that one word be? And if you would, when this is done, write that word down now. And when this is done, please leave a comment because I'd love to see what all the people are saying. And then when we do the next video after this one, we'll let you all know who's responded, what the responses were, and what the words were. But I think it's an interesting way to begin this, okay? Wonderful. I'm going to start with my favorite two quotes ever about the world of essence. And they're all coming from an unpublished writing that I've done called Beyond a Shadow of Doubt, the Transpersonal Dimension of Growth in Psychology. And I'll be reading from that. I'm going to start with, as a rule, essence is not recognized in psychology or psychotherapy. So alienation from essence is not seen. It is seen that people are not in touch with their emotions and their sensations. It is seen that people are controlled by complex structures of unconscious beliefs, fears, and defenses. But that extra dimension, the existence of the true being, is not generally seen or taken into consideration in psychological theory. That's quote number one. Quote number two. If William James's ideas, and he was the father of American psychology, were fully accepted along with their implications, they would revolutionize the field of psychology and the nature of psychotherapy. People would have to study the realm of the sacred, and therapeutic training would have to include the spiritual dimension of human experience. Never again would the psychology profession be able to separate psyche from soul and psychology from spirituality. It is unfortunate that modern psychology has ignored the spiritual domain and thus failed to explore what may be the most important dimension of the human mind. Okay? Shocking, isn't it? Both those quotes are what they say. So with that in mind, I now would like to chat briefly about primary learning. Primary learning is when we're infants and we're going to assume for this video it's birth to 5 years old. And I'm going to read just two simple things about that. First one comes from a book called The Essential Crazy Wisdom, one of my favorite books. And get ready for this one. As infants, we ingest our parents and then spend the rest of our lives trying to digest them. We eat them whole, from their genes to their judgments. We eat their values, their fears, their moods, their worldviews. Even if we rebel against them, they shape that rebellion. Their voices continuously echo inside of us. We never leave home. Psychologists tell us that we are stuck inside personalities that are almost completely formed in our earliest years, long before we could decide who we wanted to be. And the second piece is from a book called The New People Making by Virginia Satir. I had the pleasure of studying with her. She was known as the mother of family therapy back in the day, or the founder of family therapy back in the day. And what she suggested, and she had seen over 300,000 clients in her lifetime, her estimate was that by the time a child was 5 years old, they had had over 500,000 social interactions with significant others in their world. It could have been words, it could have been a body posture, it could have been a facial position or a stance, but over 500,000 messages that they got from people in their lives to be this way, and this is the right way to do stuff. So you take those two quotes together and you look at the primacy of what we learned early in childhood, when the part of our brains that allow us to go, this is okay, don't want to take this in, we're not connected yet. Okay, so the power of primary learning is where we're going with that one. So with that in mind, going back to the article that I wrote, we live in a culture of great doubt regarding the existence of a transpersonal or a spiritual dimension of human existence. This doubt casts a very large shadow. Let's look at psychology first of all and see how that's affected by the large shadow. In the field of psychology, which clearly originated as a Western discipline, we have had Sigmund Freud telling us that at our core is our id. And he defined the id, quote, as the raw, savage, undisciplined, pleasure-seeking, basic stuff that energizes man throughout his life. It knows no laws, follows no rules, and considers only its own appetites. So from 1900 to 1950 in the United States of America, and a little earlier than that in Europe, that's what people were told about psychology. Let me just talk about the power of that. If it was just a psychological theory, it would be much important. But if you look at the books written about how to raise a child back in those days, how to educate children back in the days, how to manage people if you own a business back in the days, and the way the laws were written back in the days, you're going to find that it was much more than just a psychological theory. It affected how we live, how we learn, how we were taught, how we were managed, and how the law took effect from 1900 to 1950. Okay, and the message was, don't go inside. It's really scary and awful there. Then in the 1950s, when science, when physics and chemistry was coming up with all this stuff, psychology said, let's get more scientific. And the second school of psychological thought, the first one being Freudian psychoanalysis, the second one was Watson, Skinner, and the behaviorists. And they tried to make psychology very scientific. So let's look at what they came up with. We had Watson and Skinner and the behaviorists telling us that we were a tabula rasa, a blank slate at birth. We have no inner nature. We become the traits and characteristics that external forces reinforce. And from 1950 to 1975, that was the dominating psychological concepts and theories and philosophy that we all lived and grew up with. These first two forces in the field of psychology clearly negate our transpersonal dimension of growth. Okay, so Let me shift one other way. Holistic and transpersonal psychology recently, from the 1970s until currently, has been trying to shift this. And there are other names like positive psychology, integral psychology, humanistic psychology, somatic psychology that would also be part of that grouping. But I'm going to start with transpersonal psychology or holistic psychology. The poet Rilke has written that our senses, which originally allowed us to see and connect with the spirit world, have atrophied. Transpersonal psychology attempts to show us how to reawaken senses and, quote, open up domains of being which we have forgotten. So a lot of this video is going to be looking at, from the world of psychology, how we can do that. Okay? Next, let's look at the world of religion. Historically, the major religions of the Western world each had a schism, a separation between their more traditional and mystical branches. Christianity and Gnosticism, Judaism and Kabbalah, Islam and Sufism. In each case, the traditional perspective held that an intermediary, another person, was required to understand the work of God, be it a priest, a rabbi, or a mullah. This view always denied or minimalized the more mystical branches that believed a person could connect with God through their own lived experiences, and that this connection is an important part of our inner nature. So the doubt becomes normalized, both with psychology and religion, and the shadow seems to be omnipresent, alarming, and overwhelming. Okay? Just giving you a sense of why the mystical seems so tricky for so many of us to really understand. Various names for this which we're studying could be being, could be essence, could be soul, could be true nature, and there are many other names that can be included in what we're looking at. I don't want to get into how those names differ. I want to see them all as the fact that we're going to have something deeper and more foundational than our ego or personality to also connect with and understand. Okay. We've looked at psychology. We've looked at religion. Let's look at evolution. I'm going to come from one of my favorite books also, called The Seat of the Soul by Gary Zukov. You know I like the word amazing. If you've read any of these before, listened to any of these before, he is amazing. So here's what I'm going to do with that one. When talking about evolution, and I would agree with what he's saying wholeheartedly, we are evolving from 5 sensory humans, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching, into multi-sensory humans. Our 5 senses together form a single sensory system that is designed to perceive physical reality. The perceptions of a multi-sensory human extend beyond physical reality to a larger dynamical system of which our physical reality is just a part. As a personality becomes multi-sensory, its intuitions, its hunches, and subtle feelings become important to it. It senses things about itself, about other people, and the situations in which it finds itself that cannot justify on the basis of the information that its 5 senses can provide, because it's getting other information in there beyond sight, hearing, taste, smell, and touch. And finally, from this book, this is a book about authentic empowerment, the alignment of the personality with the soul. And I love that phrase, the alignment of the personality with the soul. What that involves, how it happens, and what it creates. To understand these things requires an understanding of things that appear unusual to the 5 sensory human. But they become natural once you understand evolution. That 5 sensory perception is a journey leading to multi-sensory perception, and that you were not always meant to be 5 sensory. That our leap as humans is moving us from 5 sensory to multi-sensory. I'll get back to that in a little bit later as well, but I just want to leave that alone for now. I know I've said this, but I think my saying this is important, but I want to bring in a bunch of other people who say this. And again, I've limited it to 4 or 5. I could probably bring in 500, if not 1,000, if not 1,500. The fact that this has been said by so many people is shocking. What it's been called is the perennial philosophy, if you want to Google that and look at all the names, but I'm just going to give you a few. I'm going to start with Psychosynthesis by Roberto Assagioli, which is where I got my basic training. And what he says, and I love the way he talks about it, that we need to have a unifying center inside of us. And most people consider their personality their unifying center. And he talks about that is not true. We can make that our unifying center, but it's based on 5 senses and it's limited. And by realizing one's true sense, their essence, their soul, we have a greater sense of what our unifying center is, which allows us to be further grounded. And I just love the way he talks about that. His book Psychosynthesis talks about that often, but I just wanted to bring him in. Then I want to bring in a book called Holy Fire, The Process of Soul Awakening by Thomas Yeomans. I want to give kudos to Tom Yeomans. One of my mentors in my lifetime, did the first counseling with me back in the 1970s where he was the teacher, knew Roberto Assagioli, studied with him, and is literally an amazing human being on the planet to get to know. In the beginning of his book, of Holy Fire, he says one thing about Roberto Assagioli, and I couldn't find the quote by Roberto, but the fact that Tom has it there works for me. And the quote is Roberto Assagioli saying, "We must learn to live as souls on earth." That our groundedness, our center, our core needs to be from our souls, not from our personalities. And I just love that. And Tom also talking about the soul says, "I have come to use the word soul to express the experience of the core consciousness in each of us. Synonyms might be essence, true nature, core being, self with a capital S, or the higher self with a capital H and S." Amazing book. You're all going to get that much from it. Next, going into Beyond Religion. I like page 57. 57 is talking about Sean McNiff. And Sean McNiff wrote a book called Art Heals, How Creativity Cures the Soul. Sean has been at Leslie with me since the 70s, and he is one of my heroes as well. He is an international writer about expressive arts therapy, creative arts and learning, and looking at how art and the imagination and movement and all those creative fields can help get one to connect with their soul as well. He's written 10 books, but again, Sean McNiff, he teaches at Leslie. He is also magnificent. And I want to read one thing that he said about the soul. He says, "The word soul suggests the essential nature of persons." So the themes here seem to be deeper and more essential than an ego or a personality. And finally, how to connect with your inner essence is a fair question, right? Okay, I get it. So if I'm having a hard time moving from my core, moving from my personality or my ego into my depth, how can that happen? And here's my beginning answer. One answer is using your intuition. And the video that we've done already called Think You Aren't Functioning as Well as You Could talk about how intuition differs from cognition and how cognition will keep you stuck from your inner essence and intuition will work there. So please consider watching that one. It talks about it and it suggests what to do with that. The other way of doing that is through our right hemisphere. We've got 4 major parts of our human brain and the right hemisphere. If you want to hear about that one, there are 2 videos we've done already. The first one is called Ever Flip Your Lid, which will talk about 3 parts of the brain structures. And the 4th one is under the video called Ever Wonder Why Life Doesn't Seem Meaningful Enough? But the right hemisphere of humans, a place that we don't live in often enough, is also an obvious way to begin to connect with our inner essence. And finally, The last video, called Ever Have a Mystical Spiritual Experience, talks about how to do that also. The future videos will also go there, because I think the question of, as a teacher, as a human, as a parental unit, if I'm looking at students and think that they don't have an inner essence, I've got to give them everything externally. Same thing with children. If I think that people have an inner essence, my job changes drastically. My job is to help them create and discover and nurture their inner essence, because it's saying that that's going to be their core, that's going to give them guidance in their lifetime. It's drastically different than giving people all the information. Okay? I want to end with one quote. Gary Zukov, Seat of the Soul, says, "We have much to do together. Let us do it in wisdom and love and joy. Let us make this our human experience. We can live there by following the soul, the inner essence, more often than the ego and the personality. We do have work to do, but it could be more joyful work than many of us believe is possible." That's it for today. Thank you very much. Be well, good people.